My name is Linda, and I call a peaceful town just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, my home. Life has gotten quieter since I celebrated my 60th birthday, but I've learned to love this slower rhythm. After spending decades teaching and raising two sons who now have little ones of their own, my garden has transformed into my special place. It's where I go to clear my mind, take deep breaths, and lately, to feel truly alive again. That particular morning started just like countless others. The sun was already climbing high, creating beautiful spots of light between the shadows cast by the tall maple trees that border my backyard. The gentle buzz of busy bees moved through the purple lavender bushes, and the smell of rich, fresh earth filled the air around me. I was kneeling on the ground, wearing my favorite old straw hat and a pair of well-worn gloves that had been through many gardening seasons. I was carefully placing a row of bright marigolds along the garden's edge. I was completely lost in my own world, humming a little tune to myself, focused on the simple rhythm of digging small holes and gently pressing the soil around each plant. That's when I suddenly felt someone standing behind me. It wasn't scary or threatening, just completely unexpected. "Those flowers are going to look absolutely stunning when they start blooming," came a warm voice from behind me. I spun around quickly, my heart beating just a bit faster than normal for someone my age. Standing there was Tom. He used to deliver newspapers in our neighborhood many years ago, back when his voice was still changing, and he rode around on a bright red bicycle with one pedal that was slightly crooked. But the person in front of me now wasn't that young boy anymore. He had grown into a man in his early 30s, with broad shoulders, skin tanned from spending time outside, and the kind of calm confidence you rarely see in someone so young. "Tom, I haven't seen you in ages," I said, brushing the dirt off my knees as I got to my feet. He gave me a genuine smile. "Yeah, I was visiting my mother down the street and decided to take a walk. When I spotted you out here working in your garden, I had to come say hello." I found myself laughing, though I'm not sure why I suddenly felt the urge to smooth down my hair or adjust my gardening shirt. "You really caught me by surprise, but it's wonderful to see you." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Not in any romantic way, not at that point, but in that special human way of recognizing someone from your past who has changed into something completely new and interesting. He offered to help me finish planting the last few flowers, and I didn't refuse his kind offer. He picked up a small hand shovel from my gardening bag and knelt down beside me in the soft earth. For the next while, we worked together in comfortable silence, sharing little stories here and there. He told me about his job creating beautiful outdoor spaces as a landscape designer. I shared stories about my grandchildren and how much joy this garden brings to my life. Then, as he passed me a marigold plant, our hands touched briefly. It was completely innocent, but it sent an unexpected tingle up my arm that I hadn't felt in years. I looked up and found his eyes meeting mine. They weren't intense or heavy, but they were honest and maybe just a little bit curious about me. "Do you ever feel lonely out here by yourself?" he asked in a gentle voice. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how quiet everything around us had become. The birds had stopped their singing, and even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. "Sometimes," I answered honestly, "but I've learned to find ways to fill the quiet moments." He nodded like he understood something much deeper than just my words. We finished planting together, and as we both stood up, he wiped his hands clean on his jeans. "I'd really love to visit again if you wouldn't mind. Maybe I could bring some flower seeds of my own to plant. I smiled, feeling something wake up inside me that had been sleeping for years. I'd like that very much, Tom. I really would. He walked away down my garden path, with sunlight catching the edges of his strong shoulders. He turned back to give me one final wave, and I stood there among my marigolds and lavender, wondering why my heart was still fluttering like it did when I was 20 years old. Maybe it was nothing special. Maybe it was just a pleasant visit from an old neighbor. But something deep inside told me this was the start of something I hadn't expected, and maybe, just maybe, something I truly needed. The next several days crawled by slowly, the way time moves when you're waiting for something but trying to pretend you're not. I kept telling myself I shouldn't expect him to actually return. After all, people say those things all the time: "I'll stop by" or "let's catch up soon," and most of the time they don't really mean it. But a part of me hoped with all my heart that he did. It was Thursday afternoon when I saw him walking up my path again. I was trimming the rose bushes near the fence, wearing those same old gloves, and trying not to look like I'd been glancing down the road every few hours, hopping to spot him. I heard footsteps, confident and unhurried, and turned just as Tom pushed open my garden gate with his elbow. He was carrying a small tray of baby plants in both hands. "Brought those seeds I promised," he said with a big grin. I felt warmth spread through my chest, the kind that made me stand up a little straighter and feel more alive. "You always show up carrying plants, don't you?" "It comes with the job," he said, setting the tray down on my back porch table. "These are special heirloom tomatoes. I thought you might have room for them somewhere." We spent the next hour working side by side once again, talking about different types of soil, how much sunlight plants need, and how incredibly stubborn squirrels can be when they want your vegetables. But our conversation wasn't really just about gardening. It wandered into deeper territory. He told me about a woman he used to date, someone who never understood his love for quiet, simple things. I shared stories about how my late husband and I used to spend Saturday evenings dancing together in our living room, just the two of us, with an old jazz record playing softly in the background. Somehow, the age difference between us didn't seem to matter anymore. It felt like two people really talking and truly seeing each other clearly. At one point, we stopped working to have some lemonade. I poured it from a glass pitcher that had belonged to my mother and handed him a tall, cold glass covered in tiny water drops. We sat together on the wooden bench beneath my favorite oak tree, with golden sunlight filtering through the leaves above us. I could feel the warmth coming from him, not just the physical warmth of another person, but the way he really listened to every word I said, like what I had to share actually mattered to him. After a long, comfortable pause, he glanced at me, his voice becoming quieter. "You know, when I was younger, I used to think you were the most graceful person in the entire neighborhood. You had this peaceful way about you that made the world feel less heavy and chaotic." I wasn't sure how to respond to such a beautiful compliment. It was the kind of thing you rarely hear, especially not at my age, and certainly not from a handsome man like him. I looked down at my hands, noticing the fine lines that traced across my knuckles and the tiny specks of dirt that hadn't quite washed off. "Grace feels like something that belonged to a much younger version of me," I said softly. "No," he replied, setting his glass down carefully. "It's still there, clear as day, maybe even stronger now." His words settled over me like a soft, warm blanket, comforting and intimate. I felt my chest tighten, not with discomfort, but with something much deeper. Maybe it was recognition, or perhaps longing, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. As the sun began to sink lower and shadows stretched longer across the yard, he stood up and helped me rise from the bench. His hand lingered around mine just a second longer than necessary. It wasn't bold or rushed or pushy. It just felt natural and right. "I'll visit again next week," he said with certainty. "You better," I replied, smiling despite the storm of emotions stirring inside my heart. After he left, I sat alone in my peaceful garden, with the scent of tomato leaves on my fingers and the echo of his warm voice still in my ears. There was definitely something beautiful unfolding here, slow and steady, like a flower opening after a long, cold winter. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone or forgotten. I felt truly seen and appreciated. The following week arrived with a change in the weather, warmer and heavier, the kind of early summer heat that makes the petals on my hydrangea flowers droop by noon. I spent most mornings taking care of my garden before the sun got too intense, though I'll admit I was always keeping one eye on the gate, even though I told myself not to. It was Friday when he returned, later in the day this time. I had just come inside to wash the dirt off my hands when I heard the soft creak of my garden gate swinging open. I stepped out onto the porch, drying my hands with a kitchen towel, and there he was at Tom, wearing a navy blue shirt that clung slightly from the heat, holding a small brown paper bag. "Hope I'm not too late," he said warmly. "I brought something special." He reached into the bag and pulled out a pair of small ceramic planters, painted by hand with tiny vines curling around their edges in delicate patterns. "Made these myself," he said proudly. "Figured your lavender might look beautiful in them." I stared at the planters, touched in a way I didn't expect. They weren't perfect, one had a small chip on the side, but they were absolutely beautiful and so thoughtful, just like him. "They're lovely," I said, running my fingers over the smooth glaze. "No one has made something special just for me in such a long time." We planted together again, but this time in comfortable silence. There wasn't much left to say, and somehow that felt perfectly right, the kind of quiet that settles between people when they no longer need to fill every moment with words. When we finished our work, I invited him inside. It wasn't something I had planned, at least not consciously, but the sun was setting, and there was beautiful golden light pouring through my windows that made everything feel softer and more magical. We stepped into my kitchen, where the air was cool and still. I poured us 2 tall glasses of iced tea, and we sat across from each other at the wooden table that still shows scratches from years of family dinners and homework sessions. His eyes moved around the room, pausing at an old framed photograph of my husband and me on the mantel above the fireplace. "Do you miss him?" he asked gently. I didn't look away from his caring gaze. Every single day, but it's different now. It's more like he's become a part of me rather than someone who's completely gone. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "I think he would be proud of the beautiful life you've created." That struck something deep inside me. I felt my throat tighten with emotion, but I didn't cry. Instead, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. It felt completely natural, not planned, but absolutely right. He didn't pull away from my touch. The moment stretched between us, charged with a kind of electricity I hadn't felt in years. His thumb brushed gently across the back of my hand, slow and deliberate. There was no urgency in his touch, no pressure or demands, just pure presence and connection. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not," I replied, and I meant every word. He stood up slowly and came around the table, gently pulling me to my feet. I looked up at him, this man so much younger than me, yet somehow so grounded and genuine and open to whatever was happening between us. We stood close together, the space between us melting away until I could feel the warmth of his breath and the steady beating of his heart through his shirt. He leaned in slowly, pausing just a breath away from my lips, and when we finally kissed, it wasn't like in the movies. It was slower and more searching, as if both of us were afraid we might have imagined this beautiful moment. When we pulled apart, I didn't speak, and neither did he. He held my gaze for a long, meaningful moment, then pressed his forehead gently against mine. It was tender and real and perfect. We didn't do anything more that evening. He stayed for another hour, and we talked and laughed together. We even danced slowly in my kitchen when a romantic song came on the radio. It was clumsy and sweet, and made me feel younger than I had in decades. When he finally had to leave, he kissed my cheek softly and promised to come back soon. After the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the quiet of my house, but this time the silence felt completely different. It wasn't empty or hollow. It was full of hope and possibility. The following week, I found myself moving through my daily routine with a quiet kind of excitement. I baked more cookies and bread than usual. I wore lipstick again, even just to pull weeds. I caught myself smiling at nothing in particular, and when I looked at my reflection in the mirror, while I was certainly older, I looked softer somehow, like I was remembering something wonderful I had forgotten a long time ago. Tom came back on Sunday afternoon. No plants this time, no gloves or gardening bags or tools. Just him, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans, his eyes warm and bright when I opened the door. It struck me in that moment how natural this was all becoming. How something that had started with dirt under our fingernails was now rooted in something much deeper and more meaningful. "Thought I'd cook dinner for you," he said, holding up a small basket of fresh groceries. "You always feed me iced tea and kindness. I figured I should return the favor." We cooked together in my kitchen, him chopping fresh vegetables, me stirring the pasta sauce, with soft music humming in the background. We moved around each other like we'd been doing this dance for years instead of weeks. He told me about a new landscaping project he'd started, how he'd suggested planting a special garden designed for older folks who couldn't kneel down anymore. I could hear the thoughtfulness and care in his voice, and it made me feel proud to know such a considerate person. When dinner was ready, we ate on my back porch as the garden shimmered under the twilight sky. The marigolds were now bright and full of color. The tomatoes stood tall and strong on their wooden stakes. The scent of fresh basil and sweet honeysuckle floated through the air, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees above us. We didn't rush our conversation. We didn't feel the need to fill every quiet moment with words. And when we finished eating, he leaned back in his chair, looking out over my garden like it was the most peaceful place on earth. "I didn't expect this," he said thoughtfully. "Us, whatever this beautiful thing is that's happening between us." "Neither did I said, looking at him with wonder. "But I'm so grateful it happened." He turned to face me fully, his expression open and unguarded. "I know there's an age difference between us. I know how it might look to other people, but none of that has changed how I feel when I'm with you. You make me feel steady and honest and truly seen. That word again, seen. I felt it land in my chest, heavier and more meaningful than it had before. I spent years thinking that part of my life was completely over, I said honestly. Love, attraction, even just being noticed by someone special. I buried all of that under daily routines and safe choices. But then you walked into my garden and everything shifted and changed. He reached for my hand across the table and held it gently. No urgency, no performance, just a genuine human connection between two people who cared about each other. I don't know where this path leads us, he said sincerely, but I'd love to keep walking with you wherever it goes. I didn't answer right away. I let myself feel the full weight of his words and the truth behind them. Then I smiled, soft and steady, like the gentle wind moving through the trees. I'd like that very much too. As the sky darkened and the first bright stars began to appear above us, we stayed on the porch, holding hands and watching the fireflies rise like tiny sparks from the earth around us. It wasn't dramatic or like something from a storybook, but it was real and honest and beautiful. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing still, watching life pass by from the sidelines. I was living it, fully alive, with someone wonderful beside me who made the quiet moments feel rich and full, the future feel wide open, and this sweet, surprising, unplanned moment feel exactly right.